The silence in our kitchen that morning should have been my first warning. Grant stood there buttering his toast with the mechanical precision of someone who'd rather be anywhere else, and I was already mentally rehearsing the stories I planned to tell at his birthday party that evening. The good ones. The ones that would make everyone laugh and remind them why they loved him. I had no idea I was about to destroy everything we'd built together. We'd been married for 7 years, and I thought I knew exactly what kind of wife I was supposed to be. The supportive one, the entertaining one, the woman who could work a room and make her husband look good in front of his colleagues and friends. I'd perfected this role over the years, collecting anecdotes about Grant like precious gems, polishing them until they shined just right for social occasions. "Your mother called," I said, spreading jam on my bagel. "She's bringing that potato salad you like." "MMM." Grant didn't look up from his newspaper. He'd been distant lately, but I attributed it to work stress. He'd just made partner at his law firm, and the pressure was intense. I figured a good party surrounded by people who cared about him would snap him out of whatever funk he was in. "I've got some great material for tonight," I continued, warming to the subject. "Remember when you were 12 and got your head stuck in the banister? Your dad had to use dish soap to get you out." Grant's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Zelda, please don't." "Don't what? It's adorable. Everyone loves those stories." "I don't love them," I laughed, thinking he was being modest. "Come on, you're turning 35. Time to embrace your awkward phase. We all had one." He folded his paper with sharp, deliberate movements. "I'm asking you not to tell those stories tonight." Something in his tone made me pause, but I brushed it off. "They're harmless, Grant. People expect it. It's what wives do at birthday parties." "Is it?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Exhaustion. Not the kind that comes from late nights at the office, but the deeper kind that seeps into your bones when you've been fighting a losing battle for too long. "I'm just trying to make tonight special," I said, suddenly defensive. "For who?" The question hung between us like a challenge I wasn't prepared to answer. Before I could respond, Grant grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door. "I'll see you tonight, and Zelda, please, just please don't." But I didn't listen. I never listened, not really. I was too busy being the wife I thought he wanted, the one who could command a room and make everyone feel at ease. I spent the day preparing for his party, arranging flowers, setting up the backyard, and mentally organizing my repertoire of Grant stories. The swimming lesson disaster when he was 8, the time he cried during a school play about vegetables, the phase when he collected bottle caps and arranged them by color in his bedroom. Harmless stories, cute stories, stories that painted him as endearingly human. Looking back now, I realized there had been signs that I'd completely missed, small moments that should have clued me in to how Grant really felt about my storytelling. Like the time at his colleague's wedding when I'd launched into the tale of his disastrous first driving test, and he'd excused himself to the bathroom for an unusually long time. Or the dinner party where I'd described his teenage poetry phase in vivid detail, and he'd spent the rest of the evening unusually quiet, picking at his food and checking his phone. There was also the incident at his law firm's holiday party 6 months earlier. I'd been holding court near the punch bowl, regaling a group of his colleagues with the story of how Grant had gotten food poisoning from a gas station's sushi on our honeymoon, and spent 3 days convinced he was dying. The lawyers had laughed appreciatively, but when I'd looked over at Grant, he was standing alone by the window, staring out at the city lights with an expression I couldn't read. When I'd approached him later, he'd said he had a headache and asked if we could leave early. I'd chalked it up to work stress, just like I always did. Grant was ambitious, driven, the kind of person who internalized pressure rather than expressing it. I thought I was helping by being the social one, the one who could lighten the mood and make him seem more approachable to his colleagues. I genuinely believed I was being supportive, but there had been other moments too, quieter ones that I dismissed even more easily. The way he'd changed the subject when I started to tell his mother about his fear of butterflies. The slight tension in his shoulders when I'd begin recounting his failed attempts at learning to play guitar to our dinner guests. The way he'd suddenly find urgent tasks to attend to whenever I started sharing what I called his greatest hits, the collection of childhood mishaps and adolescent awkwardness that I'd refined into perfectly timed anecdotes. I'd interpreted his reactions as shyness, as the natural embarrassment that anyone might feel when their spouse shared personal stories. I'd never considered that it might be something deeper, something that went to the core of how he felt about trust and privacy and the sanctity of the things we share with the people we love most. The truth was, I'd been so focused on being the kind of wife I thought I should be entertaining, charming, socially adept that I'd stopped paying attention to the kind of wife Grant actually needed. I'd been performing our marriage instead of living it, and I'd been so caught up in the applause that I'd missed the fact that my audience of one was sitting in the back row, quietly asking me to stop. Even that morning, when he'd explicitly asked me not to tell those stories, I dismissed his request as pre-party nerves. I'd convinced myself that once everyone was laughing and having a good time, he'd see that I was right. He'd understand that I was just trying to make him look good, to show everyone what a wonderful, relatable, human person he was. I'd thought I was celebrating him, but I'd never stopped to consider whether he felt celebrated. By 6 o'clock, our backyard was transformed. String lights cast a warm glow over the tables, and the smell of barbecue filled the air. Grant's colleagues from the firm mingled with our neighbors, old college friends, and family members. It was exactly the kind of gathering I excelled at hosting. Grant moved through the crowd with practiced ease, but I noticed he kept checking his watch. When his law partner, Susan, approached me with a glass of wine, I saw my opening. "Zelda, this is lovely," Susan said, gesturing at the decorations. "You've outdone yourself." "Well, Grant deserves the best," I replied, settling into hostess mode. "You know, he's always been a perfectionist, even as a kid." Susan smiled encouragingly, and I felt the familiar rush of having a receptive audience. When he was 14, he spent an entire summer practicing magic tricks to impress a girl at school. He had this cape. His mother made it out of an old bedsheet, and he would perform these elaborate shows for anyone who would watch. "How sweet," Susan laughed. The best part was the grand finale. He had this trick where he was supposed to make a rabbit appear from a hat, but he could never get it right. The rabbit would either refuse to come out or would escape and run around the yard. One time, it got into his mother's garden and ate all her prized tomatoes. The small crowd that had gathered around us chuckled appreciatively. I felt energized, validated. This was what I was good at, making people comfortable, drawing them together with shared laughter. "Oh, and there was this one time when Grant was probably 11 or 12, I continued, my voice carrying across the yard. "He decided he wanted to be a detective, so he started a neighborhood watch program. He would hide behind trees and take notes on everyone's activities. Mrs. Henderson next door was convinced there was a stalker until Grant's mother explained it was just her son fighting crime." More laughter. I was on a roll now, and I could see people gravitating toward our little circle. Grant's cousin Jake was grinning, and even Grant's usually reserved father was smiling. But the absolute best was when he was 7 and decided he wanted to be a professional wrestler. He made his own costume. I gestured dramatically, complete with a mask made from one of his father's old ties. He called himself the Incredible Grant and would challenge anyone to matches in the backyard. The problem was, he was terrified of getting hurt, so he'd spend 5 minutes before each match explaining all the safety rules to his opponent. The crowd was really laughing now, and I felt that familiar high of being the center of attention. I barely noticed Grant approaching from across the yard, his expression unreadable. "The funniest part," I continued, building to what I thought would be the perfect punchline, was that he kept a first aid kit ringside and would stop mid-match to check if anyone was injured. He once forfeited a match against his 8-year-old cousin because he was worried she might bruise her knee. "Zelda," Grant's voice cut through the laughter like a blade. Everyone turned to look at him, and I felt the energy shift. The easy camaraderie of moments before evaporated, replaced by something tense and uncomfortable. "That's enough," he said quietly. I blinked, confused. "What?" I said, "That's enough." His voice was steady, but I could see the muscle in his jaw working. "Stop." The party guests began to disperse, sensing the sudden tension. Susan cleared her throat and excused herself to find the restroom. Grant's mother appeared at his elbow, looking concerned. "Grant, honey, what's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing, Mom. Everything's fine." but his eyes were fixed on me, and they held a mixture of hurt and something else I couldn't quite identify. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. I was just telling stories, I said, my voice smaller now. Everyone was enjoying them. Were they? Grant asked. Were they really, or were you enjoying telling them? I felt heat rise in my cheeks. What's that supposed to mean? It means, Grant said, his voice still carefully controlled, that I asked you this morning not to do this. I asked you specifically not to tell those stories, and you did it anyway. They're just stories, Grant. They're not secrets. They're not yours to tell. The words hit me like a physical blow. Around us, the party continued, but it felt muted, as if we were having this conversation in a bubble separate from everyone else. I don't understand, I said, and I genuinely didn't. I was trying to make people laugh. I was trying to make tonight special. Special for who? Grant asked, echoing his question from that morning. Because it sure as hell wasn't for me. His mother touched his arm. Grant, maybe you should. No, Mom, I'm done pretending this is okay. He looked at me again, and I saw something in his expression that made my stomach clench. Zelda, I need you to leave. Leave. I couldn't have heard him correctly. This is my house, too. It's your party. I organized all of this. And I'm asking you to leave. Now. The conversations around us had stopped entirely. I could feel eyes on us, feel the weight of collective discomfort. Grant's father stepped forward, his expression concerned. Son, maybe you two should talk about this privately. We've talked, Grant said, not taking his eyes off me. We've talked about this so many times, and nothing changes. She doesn't hear me. She doesn't see me. All she sees is material for her next performance. That's not true, I protested, but even as I said it, I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. Because wasn't it true? Wasn't that exactly what I'd been doing? Collecting pieces of Grant's life like props for my own social theater. When's the last time you asked me how I felt about something before you shared it with the world? Grant asked. When's the last time you considered that maybe I don't want to be the punchline of your stories? I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. Because I couldn't remember. I genuinely couldn't remember a single time when I'd asked Grant's permission before sharing something personal about him. I'd always assumed that as his wife, I had the right to these stories. They were part of our shared history, weren't they? I'm going inside, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. No, Grant said firmly. I need some space. Please just go stay with your sister for a few days. The finality in his voice terrified me. This wasn't a fight we were having. This was something else entirely, something that felt like an ending. I looked around at the faces of our guests, friends, family, colleagues, all of them carefully avoiding eye contact. The party I'd worked so hard to create, the celebration I'd intended to make perfect, had become a spectacle of a different kind entirely. Grant, I started, but he was already walking away, heading toward the house. I'll call you, he said over his shoulder. But right now, I need you to go. I stood there for a moment, surrounded by the ruins of what was supposed to be a joyful evening. Grant's mother approached me carefully, as if I might shatter. Zelda, dear, maybe it's best if you... I know, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. I'll go. I gathered my purse and keys, moving through the party like a ghost. Some people tried to catch my eye to offer confused smiles or concerned looks, but I couldn't bear to acknowledge them. I'd spent so many years working to be the perfect hostess, the entertaining wife, the woman who could make any gathering memorable. And I'd succeeded, just not in the way I'd intended. I drove to my sister Rachel's house in a daze. She opened the door in her pajamas, took one look at my face, and ushered me inside without a word. It wasn't until I was sitting in her kitchen, wrapped in her old college sweatshirt, that I finally started to cry. What happened? Rachel asked, settling across from me with 2 mugs of tea. I told her everything. The stories, the fight, the way Grant had looked at me like I was a stranger. As I spoke, I watched Rachel's expression shift from sympathy to something more complicated. Zelda, she said carefully when I finished. Can I ask you something? I nodded. How do you think Grant felt when you told those stories? Embarrassed, I guess, but everyone gets embarrassed. It's part of being human. No, I mean, how do you think he felt about you telling them? I stared at her, not understanding the distinction. I don't know, he never said anything before. Are you sure about that? The question made me pause. I tried to think back over the years to remember other parties, other gatherings, other times when I'd shared Grant's stories. Had he ever objected? Had he ever asked me not to? The memories were hazy, filtered through my own need to be entertaining, to be liked, to be seen as the kind of wife who could make her husband shine. But slowly, fragments began to surface. A hand on my arm during a dinner party. A quick shake of the head when I started to tell about his childhood fear of butterflies. A quiet, maybe not tonight, when I began recounting his failed attempts at learning guitar. Small moments I dismissed or ignored, so focused was I on getting the laugh, making the connection, being the center of attention. "Oh God," I whispered. "What?" "He did try to tell me. He's been trying to tell me for years." Rachel reached across the table and took my hand. "Why do you think you didn't hear him?" It was a question I couldn't answer that night or the next day or even the next week. I stayed with Rachel, calling in sick to work, barely eating, replaying every social interaction Grant and I had shared over the years. I began to see a pattern I'd been blind to, my constant need to perform, to be the entertainer, to use our private moments as public entertainment. Grant called on the fourth day. His voice was tired, distant. "How are you?" he asked. "Terrible," I said honestly. "Grant, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize." "I know you didn't. Can I come home? Can we talk about this?" There was a long pause. "I don't think that's a good idea right now." "What does that mean?" "It means I need more time. I need to figure out if this is something we can fix." "Of course we can fix it. I'll stop telling stories. I'll be more careful about what I share." "It's not about the stories, Zelda. It's about the fact that you didn't hear me when I asked you to stop. It's about the fact that you turned me into a character in your performance instead of treating me like a person." The words stung because they were true. I had done exactly that. I'd taken the man I loved and reduced him to a collection of anecdotes, stories that made me look good as the wife who could entertain a crowd. "I love you," I said, the words feeling inadequate and desperate. "I know you do, but love isn't enough if it comes with conditions I can't meet." "What conditions?" "The condition that I be okay with being your supporting character. The condition that I laugh along when you turn my childhood into entertainment. The condition that I pretend it doesn't hurt when you share things I've told you in confidence." I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but I found I couldn't, because he was right. I had treated him like a supporting character in my own story, and I'd been so focused on my performance that I'd forgotten to consider his feelings. "Grant, please, let me come home, let me try to do better." "I've packed some of your things. Rachel can pick them up tomorrow." The finality in his voice made me panic. "You're leaving me." "I'm taking some time to think. We both need space to figure out who we are when we're not performing for each other." "I don't understand." "I know, and that's part of the problem." The line went quiet, and I realized he'd hung up. I sat there holding the phone, staring at Rachel's kitchen wall, trying to process what had just happened. My marriage was falling apart, and I wasn't even sure I understood why. Over the following weeks, I began to see a counselor. Not couples counseling. Grant wasn't ready for that, but individual therapy to try to understand why I'd been so blind to his needs. It was uncomfortable work, examining the parts of myself I'd always considered strengths. I began to realize that my need to entertain, to be the center of attention, stemmed from my own insecurities. I'd learned early in life that being funny, being entertaining, being the person who could make others laugh was a way to ensure I was wanted, valued, included. But somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being authentic and started being performative, even with the person I loved most. Grant and I met for coffee after a month of separation. He looked tired, older somehow, but also more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. "How are you?" I asked. "Better," he said honestly. "It's been quiet, peaceful." The words hurt, but I forced myself to really hear them. "I've been thinking about what you said, about me not listening." "Yeah, you're right. I didn't listen. I was so focused on being the kind of wife I thought you wanted that I forgot to pay attention to the kind of wife you actually needed." Grant studied me for a long moment. "What kind of wife did you think I wanted?" "The entertaining one. The one who could work a room and make you look good. The one who had great stories and could make everyone laugh." "And what kind of wife do you think I actually needed?" I took a deep breath. "One who would respect your privacy, one who would ask before sharing personal things, one who would see you as a person, not as material for my next performance." "That's a start," he said quietly. Is it enough? Grant was quiet for a long time. I don't know, Zelda. I honestly don't know. We met several more times over the following weeks. Sometimes for coffee, sometimes for dinner, once for a walk in the park where we'd had our first date. Slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild something between us. But it was different now, more honest, more deliberate, more conscious of each other's boundaries. I learned to ask before sharing. I learned to listen when Grant said no. I learned to sit with silence instead of filling it with stories. It was harder than I'd expected, this new way of being, but it was also more authentic. Grant began to share things with me he'd never shared before. Real things, not just the surface-level anecdotes I'd been collecting. He told me about his fear of not being good enough, about the pressure he felt to always be perfect, about how my stories had made him feel like a child being displayed for adult amusement. I felt like I couldn't trust you with the real me, he admitted one evening as we sat on his new apartment's balcony, because I was afraid you'd turn it into entertainment. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. I never wanted you to feel that way. I know, but intent doesn't always match impact. We worked on it, slowly and carefully. I learned to tell stories about myself instead of about him. I learned to ask, is this okay to share, before launching into anecdotes. I learned to value his privacy as much as I valued his presence. But some things, once broken, can't be fully repaired. The easy trust we'd once shared was gone, replaced by something more careful, more considered. We both had to learn new ways of being with each other, and it was exhausting work. In the end, Grant moved out permanently. Not because we didn't love each other, but because we'd learned we loved each other differently than we'd thought. The marriage we'd built was founded on assumptions that turned out to be false, and we couldn't seem to build a new one on the ruins of the old. I don't regret loving you, Grant said on the day he came to collect the last of his things. I just regret that we couldn't figure out how to love each other better. I stood in our empty living room after he left, thinking about that birthday party, about the stories I'd told, about the moment when everything changed. I'd spent so many years trying to be the perfect wife that I'd forgotten to be a real person. I'd been so focused on the performance that I'd missed the actual relationship. Now, 2 years later, I still think about that night, not with regret exactly, but with a kind of hard-won wisdom. I learned that love isn't just about caring for someone, it's about caring for them in the way they need to be cared for, not just in the way that feels natural to you. I learned that stories belong to the people who lived them, not to the people who witnessed them. I learned that being a good partner means listening not just to what someone says, but to what they need, even when they're not saying it directly. I learned that some of the things we think make us good partners, being entertaining, being social, being the life of the party, can actually be walls we build between ourselves and the people we love. Most importantly, I learned that the most important audience for my life isn't a room full of party guests. It's the person sitting across from me at breakfast, the one who deserves to feel safe and respected and heard. I don't tell other people's stories anymore. I've learned to find my own.